Who else is looking for you? There's no one else.
As you can see, secrets don't stay secret for very long by TT. If you were to deviate from the plan, you'd find out quickly. I see that.
Lost in the universe.
She's here to help me find something else. You don't know.
types of neutron stars. Pulsars that spin rapidly and emit beeping radio pulses. And magnetars that spin slower and emit energy from magnetism. Magnetars, which are much rarer than pulsars, have the strongest magnetic fields known in the universe.
There aren't any places on Earth where you can find magnetic fields as strong as you find them in a magnetar. But there's kind of a parallel with this Tesla coil. The Tesla coil is originally experimented with by Nikola Tesla, who was trying to figure out how to provide electricity without having to wire homes, but actually provide electricity through the air. The Tesla coil has a big voltage difference, about 500,000 volts between the ball in the middle and the cage that surrounds it. And that gap is a release of energy that when the electrons fly through the air, it releases a tremendous amount of energy that you see in those sparks. A magnetar is kind of the same thing. It's a release of energy that you see in gamma rays and X-rays. Big voltage difference, about 500,000 volts between the ball in the middle and the cage that surrounds it. And that gap is a release of energy that when the electrons fly through the air, it releases a tremendous amount of energy that you see in those sparks. A magnetar is kind of the same thing. It's a release of energy that you see in gamma rays and X-rays.
Magnetars can release gigantic bursts of energy. Not in a periodic way like a pulsar, but rather sort of at random. Something happens to the crust, like a starquake. And a bunch of magnetic fields come together and release a tremendous amount of energy, which gets turned into X-rays and gamma rays.
Magnetars and pulsars are both strange stars, but scientists have discovered something even more bizarre. A star that acts like a pulsar and a magnetar. NASA's Rossi X-ray Timing Explorer has observed this unusual star ejecting 5 colossal outbursts of energy in the form of flares, which are characteristic of magnetars. They occurred 5 times between May and July of 2005. Each flare lasted less than a second, but released energy equivalent to tens of thousands of suns.
There's been one case of a pulsar which went through several magnetar-like outbursts that require this much stronger magnetic field and some sort of a restructuring of the magnetic field that suddenly releases a lot more energy than a normal pulsar. have at least one case of a link or a missing link between pulsars and magnetars. A pulsar that later showed some magnetar phenomena.
The pulsar-magnetar combo star is fairly young, less than 900 years old. So astronomers think neutron stars may begin their lives as magnetars, then settle down and become pulsars.
But could be that many neutron stars that eventually become normal pulsars actually go through magnetar-like outbursts when they're very young, just a few hundred years old or 1,000 years old. That could be the critical link. We're seeing this one when it's much younger than most pulsars that we see.
Some unusual stars exist in the cosmos. But there is equally odd small stuff in space. And recently, scientists have solved the mystery surrounding one of the most elusive things in the entire universe, a ghostly particle that passes through us every second of every day. The universe lays claim to infinite numbers of abnormal planets and stars. At the same time, there are equally strange, small things in space. Human beings and most of the universe are made up of normal matter, which primarily consists of four fundamental particles. One is a ghost-like particle called a neutrino.
At this very moment, every second, there are 50 trillion neutrinos.
Is it all that we will not die?
commonly formed by nuclear reactions inside stars, including our Sun.
What is this? Cultists, waiting for their deity to appear. When the catastrophes come, the god Kukulkan must be sacrificed to power the sun. Otherwise, the world dies.
Sacrifice.
The sacrifice is my duty. But this co-leader will take my place and attempt to become a god. He believes we can remake the world and even the paradise of his design.
Remake the world. What?
About 60 billion solar neutrinos pass through our thumbnails every second. But there are other sources that create neutrinos. Vast numbers of neutrinos were released into the universe immediately after the Big Bang, along with other particles and light. Humans are the descendants of this primordial soup. Neutrinos are unusual small objects,